and welcome to our live art talk today with Gina Freuen, really wonderful ceramicist from Spokane, Washington. She's going to show a little bit about her work and process, and take it away, Gina. Thank you.
Well, first of all, a big thank you to Bainbridge Arts and Crafts Center. I probably got the name wrong. I didn't. For the lovely support of my work over many, many, many years. I took pottery in college and in the 70s and fell in love with it. I've come from a family of artists, painters mostly, and didn't want to be just like everybody else. And so I saw pottery being done in high school, in college for the first time, and I thought, you know, that's something different that I could do for than everyone else in my family. And then realized that I was really kind of good at it. I have very large hands and I'm very strong, and a lot of the stuff that we do with clay takes some strength. And I think if anything stops me from doing clay, it will be struggling with the weight of the boxes and the weight of the kilns, and you know, a strong back has to be really, really important. But throughout my journey in clay, I've always loved texture. And everybody teases me over the years that I'm the teapot lady. But part of what I love about teapots is the dynamics of handle to spout to lid to body of the form. I had a range of sizes of these from small to large. When they get into the larger forms, I look at them as more, my influence on those was more your garden watering can. That, you know, sitting in my studio and watering plants, and there's that larger form that pours, and taking the form up into that next step.
Are your teapots functional?
The teapots are as functional as you want them to be, is how I answer that. So they are, all my work over the years was always fired very high temperature and all lined, and was as functional. I tried to make them functional, and a lot of people ask me, why are you worrying about that? But it's just something in the back of my brain that thought, I'm making a teapot, it should be functional. I did have funny experiences with that question of function, and that people would come into, I did the Bellevue Arts and Crafts Festival for about 20 years. And I'd have all kinds of comments in that festival. And one of a lady'd come up, she'd take the lid off, and she goes, your hole isn't big enough to put a tea bag in there, you know, for the smaller ones. And so there you go. But you know, in a teapot form, compositionally, I love, because if I were to jump back again, collecting my thoughts, my major in college and in graduate school, my emphasis area was drawing. And pottery was my secondary emphasis area. And when I got out of school and had to start having an income, I couldn't make a good solid income from the drawings, because back then they were considered just it was a study. It wasn't a finished artwork if you were doing a drawing. I never enjoyed painting. I liked pencil and paper. Nowadays, a pencil and paper drawing is very much loved, and you can get a good price for it. So my secondary emphasis then became the pottery, and I could come out and do the festivals and make a really good income from them. In the early years, they were gas-fired and electric-fired, and I knew every single, I knew how they would turn out. So if I unloaded a kiln, I knew I was going to have this body of work that I could take to a show and I could sell. Once my kids were raised and I didn't have to rely on the pottery for an income, because I started teaching at Gonzaga, I decided to start playing with the atmospheric and the soda firing work to give up some of that control. And I love that aspect of soda firing and wood firing, is that you give some control of surface to the kiln process, the kiln firing process. I'll tell you why I started doing the wood firing is that in Spokane we work alone. There aren't a lot of us over there, okay? So I'd spent probably 30 years working alone in my studio without a lot of interaction. And the only time I saw artists was when I'd come over and do the Bellevue Arts and Crafts Festival. And I got to know some of the most amazing potters who have become my friends and are still my friends to this day. And one of them asked me to come down and be part of a woman's wood firing in Southern Oregon. And I thought, my work wood fired. I don't know. I was trying to think if there's anything in this space that I should have brought an electric fired piece just to show you, but it's more pastel tones. You don't, there's a richness to the wood fire and the soda firing, but you get more earth tones. Okay. You know, but here's the journey on this is that I hated my work that came out of that wood fire, that first wood fire. I hated it. And the gal looked at me, she says, no, Gina, put it away in a box. Don't look at it for a month. And then bring it out and look at it and study it. And I think you'll change your mind. So instead of judging it right off the bat, what I loved about it is for the first time in my life, I had a community of potters to talk about things with and to share a meal with. And I'd never had that for 30 some years unless I was at a festival in town. And I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can get into another wood fire and see how I like it. So I got involved with the Seebeck kiln over here, the Santatsugama kiln. And I fired with them for close to 20 years and firing each year. And with that kiln, I started getting a lot more of the really beautiful caramel tones. And I've always drawn or carved or textured my surfaces and started figuring out how to still let that stuff happen, okay? So then when so jump forward, I was doing 1 or 2 soda firings, wood firings every year. The very last wood firing I did down in Southern Oregon, he had a section of the kiln that was an aborigama that was soda firing. And so instead of going to the wood fire end of it, I put my work into the soda fire end of it. And it was a 36-hour firing. And I went, wow, this is not a 5-day grueling wood fire where I'm stoking wood and having to live in my car and drive across the state and stay there for another week while it cools until we can unload it. And then my parents had reached a stage where I needed to be closer to home and be with them. And I thought, well, I could rebuild my kiln, my gas kiln, so that I could use it as a soda kiln. So the year that my parents kind of just started collapsing around me, I didn't have a lot of time to work in my studio, but I did have time to rebuild the kiln. And it was a car kiln, and I just went for it. I just said, okay, your gas-fired days are behind you. I was doing cone 6. And I said, just make the jump, because I'm older, I'm teaching, and I love these people that say, oh, you'll never sell another thing ever again, when you do these changes. But, they're invigorating, and the work grows. And so I completely tore the kiln down and made it so that I could soda fire it and wood fire it with the hopes that then I could stay home and I could do, so I load the kiln in the morning. We're usually done by 3. And then I candle it and it goes then all night and all day. And then we finish it off the following night. And then 3 days later, we're unloading it. And my goal was to make it so that the wood-fired work that I was having to travel to was, I would struggle to tell the difference between it and the soda-fired work. Now there are 2 wood-fired pieces in my show, and the rest are all soda-fired. And I think that if you were to look around, you'd see the difference in color in the wood-fired pieces. So this is wood-fired. And the basket right there, the basket form, that was wood-fired. And so the tones that I like from a wood fire are more of those caramel tones. Sometimes in the wood firings, the kiln I was firing in, we're getting a lot of real kind of gunmetal gray surfaces, which I wasn't as fond of. The soda firing results I've been working at are actually not typical soda firing results, I don't think. I mean, typical soda firing results would be Reed Ozaki's work that's over on the far wall. Beautiful, again, caramel surfaces she's going to bring us a lovely little Reed Ozaki piece. Okay. Yeah. This is and I think Reed has a show here in December, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this would be this is the really beautiful results that Reed get. So, feels similar, right? Mm-hmm. But I wanted to get more of I'm going to hand this back. I wanted to get more of a result of where more of my painterly surfaces to come out of the soda firing. So I work with a lot of underglaze, and then when I glaze these pieces, I have a table with Dixie cups lined up and brushes, and this is a blue celadon, and this is a caramel celadon, and this is a red chino, and this is a white chino, and this one here might be a slip that can't have anything else on it, but it's called Mother of Pearl, and the list goes on. So I've got like 10 different, and it's like a paint palette, and that's how I will approach each one of these pieces. And I start first on them by coating them with a black commercial underglaze, and then wipe it all down so it enhances the texture. And then I just start painting them. And then the shine then comes from the addition of the soda into the kiln at about, I throw wood in the kiln for about 3 hours, and I call it frosting. So it's just 3 hours of wood. Why are we doing it? Because it turns out really nice, I think. And now Reed doesn't put wood into his, and he gets beautiful results without wood. So I went to my group that I fire with, and I said, what do you think about not doing the wood? It would cut our firing down for 3 hours. And they said, why would we be fooling around with how well it's turning out? So we're going to keep doing the wood. And it's not that hard, too. And so so we do about 3 hours of wood, and then by that time we've reached cone 8 or 9, and at least cone 9 we start putting the soda, baking soda. It's baking soda and soda ash, and I do it the same way as Reed does. I've got these tubes, bamboo tubes cut in half, make up a slurry, kind of a hard, like plaster-looking mix of the soda ash, whiting, and baking soda, and put it into those tubes. And I slide them into 2 openings of the kiln, dump it out, let it go for about 15 minutes, do it again, and that takes about 3 hours, another 3 hours of the soda, because you have to let it disperse. And then you have to bring it up to the temperature you want to finish off the firing. Shut it down. I used to do what's called a hydrogen reduction cool, and tried it once without doing it, and it didn't look any different. So I gave up on the 5 hours of hydrogen reduction cooling. I went, oh, this must not be that important. But I've heard a lot of people, it was kind of like a fad to do this hydrogen reduction cooling, so I kind of thought I needed to at least try and see what it looked like. But anyway, so that's my firing process. I do about 4 firings a year. Yes.
Do you use different clay bodies very often, or do you stick with one main?
I use 3. So I use a porcelain, and I've used different kinds of porcelains. Kleiber is the one I was using a lot out of Clay Art in Tacoma. Now I'm using one called Takahara. I'm not too fussy about my basic thing on the clay body is a really true porcelain I can't work with, because I'm doing too much handling and playing with the surface and too much carving, and we're dry in Eastern Washington, and it dries out way too fast. So I use, basically, in my opinion, the porcelains I use are more like a white stoneware porcelain, but I think they call them a porcelain. And then I use a B-mix because I really love the tones I get with B-mix. I think both of these two tall ones are B-mix. That's B-mix. Whereas this one's porcelain. And then I have a shop clay, meaning I take all my scrap, porcelain and B-mix, and I throw it into barrels and I recycle it. And I use it for a lot of these, the shop mix. I call it shop mix, and it's nice because it's a nice. I mean, I don't like throwing clay away, and I like to use it. I have a very small studio. I started off with an unfinished bedroom as a studio for about 12 years. And did all the arts festivals out of that small space with my little kids and a playpen in the corner. And I then moved out to 5 acres and was able to build a nice 30 by 30 foot studio, and where I could draw and do everything in it, and it was wonderful, and could teach classes, and the list goes on. And then about in 2010, when my folks started and stuff, I kind of started looking at my studio, and I was alone at that point because my husband had passed away, and I thought, well, you know, what if I turned the studio into something I could live in and work in? And so in 2017, I tore my studio down and rebuilt it so that I live in 3/4 of it and I work in 1/4 of it. So I'm now back into a 12 by 12 foot studio, and I freaking love it. Absolutely loving it. I love it. I don't store stuff. I don't hold on to stuff. If the piece cracks and it has anything wrong with it, it goes back in the recycle bin. I don't try and save it. I used to be a hoarder of all these little textures I love, and now I don't even try. And so it's easy. I love this small space, and would never go back to a great big one again. I've never used in my studio, you know, I brought a selection of my favorite tools that I like to use, which you know, I've never had a clay slab roller. I've never had extruders. I've always had a table, a wheel, and a rolling pin for 50 years. And I love it. I've worked simple. And so I have a tendency to collect buckets of textures and buckets of dry cleaning plastic. But I discovered, interestingly enough, on the dry cleaner, really jumped on this one, but I discovered the dry cleaning plastic when I wrap things, and I don't know if you can see it maybe on that one, but you'll see sometimes on some of these pieces, I'll see a shadow of where the dry cleaning plastic was, and it stays all the way through the firings. And I had somebody research it for me, and they said that it gives off a chemical gas that permeates the clay and keeps it from absorbing all the stuff that is happening in the clay firing. And it's just a really subtle shadow that I can probably see on them, but no one else can. So I actually have quit using dry cleaning plastic and try and use stuff the other bad plastic instead, to keep things from drying out too fast in Spokane. In Spokane, I go through gyrations of trying to slow things down so they dry. I have these things. I have like 3 or 4 of these, which are heaven. They're in different sizes. They have an inch of plaster in the bottom, and I keep it wet. And I can put a piece like this in there, and it'll keep for a month exactly the way I put it in there. Wow. So when I'm working on these pieces, I will make like 6 or 7 spouts and 6 or 7 hand lids and some of these other pieces. On the little bowl forms, I'll make this little throne form, and I'll make like 30 of them, and I'll sit them in there. Once I get them all trimmed, and I haven't built the sides onto them yet, I'll just stack them up in these plaster bins, and they'll stay in perfect shape until I'm ready to use them. Whereas if I just put them on my counters and wrap them in plastic, I have to get to them fast. So that was a fun little thing I learned from the Archie Bray kids that come over to Spokane every year and give workshops from Archie Bray, which is fun. They were showing up with their bins with plaster, and I'm going, what in the heck? So anyway, process on some of these is kind of fun. This particular line of work with these particular kinds of textures started about 10 years ago. I think, I keep going back to 10 years ago when my parents started failing, and I think that any time that you go through these personal changes in your life, I think as an artist our work changes also. And one of the things that happened then is I didn't have a lot of time to work, so I did have time to go into my studio and make a little tea bowl or a little sipper cup or something, and then I had an hour was all I had that day, instead of being able to be in my studio for 8 hours. So I started playing with these forms, and then as I started having more time, as my family started settling down, I thought, well, how can I take this bigger? And the first ones I took bigger were pretty ugly. They were really ugly. They were just chaotic, and had to sort of figure out how I could take that direction. And my process on those is, if I were to pretend this is a slab of clay, which is actually, I love old worn out towels because I'll get them wet, and then when I'm making this, I'll wrap that around, but it's not so wet that it's gonna get it sopping wet and get it too soft. It's because it's so thin, it doesn't maintain a lot of moisture in it. But if I were to pretend that this is a slab of clay, what I do on this is, and this is sort of goes into my drawing process, I started taking all of these, I made a bunch of them. I lay them down into a big slab, the size of my table, a big slab of clay that I rolled out with my rolling pin and not a slab roller. Okay.
Is that just cardboard?
This is tag board. Yeah. And I lay it down random, and then like so. And just kind of, now if I want it to go this way, which is the way I like it on the smaller pieces, on the pieces that are going to be larger, then I start looking at it from this perspective. So instead of it being, this was the form I used on a lot of these, was a little kind of a form that I made. And so, but I've used it this way, like that, and lay them all down, and I have fun just placing these textures around onto the clay slab, and thinking, it's full size. Okay, they roll it in with my rolling pin, so they're really well pressed in, and then I remove them, and I take the slab and I turn it upside down so I can't see what I'm cutting. And the purpose for that is that, in my opinion, as we get older and we get better and better at what we do, we start losing that spontaneity in our work, the accidents. And I wanted to kind of build in some level of spontaneity into the surfaces. So when I then go to cut that slab up, I'm cutting it from the back side. Then I don't see what I'm cutting. And then when I put, and I tear, I don't cut all the way through. I cut halfway and tear my cuts so that I can have that really irregular top on it. And then I take it out, and this is a thrown form, and I take that piece and I wrap it, I just wrap it around that thrown form, and then I start responding to it. So I push out, and I push in, and I push in, and in, and in, and in, and in, but then push back out again. And I just keep working all the way around it, trying to respond to whatever I see there. This little shape right here that everybody loves is, I need to go to thrift stores and buy a bunch more of them. These are the insides of calculators. You know, so when you push the buttons on calculators, it needs the little rubber thing to push the little button back up for you. So you get one surface on one side, and then you get another surface on the other side. And so that's what that is. And the only problem is that most of the time they're small, and so I can't use, I love this texture, but I can't use it on the bigger forms, which is why I played with some of these shapes like this for some bubble wrap. Bubble wrap for some reason doesn't give as clean of a result. So I've sort of made some that I can use bigger, you know, just punch holes and clip and that I can, and then I'll throw on the bigger slab that I want to use on a bigger piece. Then I'll maybe throw this one in there like this, or like that next to it or something. And then,
Do you still go to the Bellevue Festival?
no, I reached, that show is freaking exhausting. I never had help, and you're there from 9:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night, and yeah, they're long days, really long days, and it's for the youngsters. It really is. It just doesn't work. So, these are pretty basic, and my goal on some of these is I want to try and make it so the slab becomes part of the thrown form, that it isn't that. It's almost like it's one piece, but sometimes I let that thrown form show, but most of the times I try and hide the slab addition to it. This piece here then is, sometimes on the larger pieces I'll start with either a cardboard, that same chipboard, I'll make a cardboard tube or a form to help support the piece. I also on some of these will use a clay form to wrap the slab around, and as my starting point. So I'll take that slab that I played with and wrap it around the piece, paddle it into shape, and then very quickly within, as soon as it's stable, I pull the form out, because if you leave it in there, it will crack the slabs will shrink in real quick off these forms, and will split off of them. So you have to get the support forms out of the insides of your forms. Most of the times people like to build inside a form, because then they don't have to remove it, but I'm building on the outside. So on this form, this little simple form, I can build on it this way, or I can build on it this way. The picture forms I started with this as the support form on the picture forms on the bottoms. You can tell it's pretty much the same sized form, but then I added more height to it on the picture forms. So basically all these is just something to help support that slab that I'm building. And then the next step that I do is, these are some simple wheel thrown forms, and I don't know why I started doing that. I don't know if I have one. I'm gonna go get a teapot. He told me I had to stay at the table. This one doesn't have the little round bowl forms on each side. So it's just a different approach. I started doing the little round bowl forms. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to extend the form out further on the sides than the slab form made. This one just has the wheel thrown spout. And I really do laugh when you talk about me being whether I'm a functional potter or not. So I don't know if any of you know Stephen Robinson, a potter in Ellensburg. Okay. He was online. He's always online. I had started doing more thrown spouts and fewer hand-built spouts because I like to actually, in most of the cases, I was making a hand-built spout with a piece of clay where I would, wrap it like this and it was textured and that would become my hand-built spout. But I was starting to throw more and more of them, and I texted him and I said, "What's the angle you cut the tip of that spout off at again?" And he told me. And so I've been trying like crazy to cut them off at the right angle, and none of them ever work for me. They're just, and it's that whole thing about whether I'm really a functional potter or not. I don't think so, because each one of these spouts is pouring off who knows what. So it's like there's something dyslexic about that for me. So he said, cut it off at 5 o'clock. And I think I've been cutting it off at 7, or I'm cutting it off. Okay, what is it? Do you know?
I have no idea.
You don't know either. Okay, great.
My spouts.
Okay. So I thought, okay. So what it is when you throw these spouts on the potter's wheel, when they unwind in the kiln firing. So they will, you're throwing it and the wheel's going this way. Then when it comes out of the firing, it's unwound. And so that means that the cut.
I don't cut spouts.
Yeah, that means that the cut on the spout unwinds. And so you have to cut it here so that it unwinds and ends up here. So, but I also think it's dependent upon the type of clay you use, how tightly you threw that stem. I think there's so many variables to that I think I'm going to quit worrying about it and just cut them straight.
That you have your hand on looks like 5 o'clock.
Oh no, it's 7.
Is it?
Yeah,
Oh.
and this one's even worse. So this is 7 too. They still pour well. They still pour well.
Explain what you mean by unwinding, just like the clay.
Clay in the firing process, you could stick a stick into it and poke it, and it will give. Okay, so the tension of throwing and lining up all those clay particles, which throwing clay lines up your clay particles. You're throwing and lining them all up, and so then in the firing process that relaxes a little bit and wants to go back to where it was. That's about all I can say. So the only thing I've really seen it really people have fussed about it is this whole thing about cutting the spout in the correct location, because the spout will unwind in the firing because it moves. It's still flexible. Yeah, and so yeah, you can enjoy going around and looking at every freaking one of my spouts and say, no, she doesn't got it. 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 So okay. So this side here is obviously how I was playing with the textures, and I've always done the lid whole thing still has a lot to do with me feeling like I have to have some sort of functional aspect to them. So the lids are measured, they fit really well. I throw what's called a flange on these, so it's like this, okay? And the flange then goes down inside, and then I flare it out like this, so that it goes down inside, and then flatten the top around the top. And the nice thing is I can make that flange as big as I want it to be to make up for any gaps that I still have on that top section. Then I measure it, and then I throw a series of lids that will fit into that opening. And then this texture here is basically, I have a big piece of this stuff, and I have some logs around my studio that I use, but more often than not, I'll use this stuff, some big pieces of this, which is the old-fashioned crinkle skirt. And when I roll it in there, then around the coil, then I come in and, I do this, and I poke it with holes like this, and I just really kind of have fun with trying to mimic the feeling of a piece of wood. When I started doing these wood forms was the first part of COVID, and I was doing this series of pieces, garden pieces, because we spent so much time in our gardens during the initiation of COVID, and that piece right here was probably one of the main ones from the COVID years, and it was, the inner piece is the garden with the birds and nesting, and then the outside piece is that enclosure that we've been placed in during COVID. And I started doing these stick forms, and I can't remember what my train of thought was on that, but I wanted them to look really realistic. So I thought, well, if they are really realistic, then they need to be nailed together. So in the early pieces, I actually would make hundreds of these little ceramic nails and put them in the soda firing. And then, of course, they break off. So then when I deliver the piece to a gallery, I say, here's some extra nails. And so this time I got smart, and instead of making nails, I did fake screws. So they won't break off, and they're there for perpetuity. Okay. So when they asked me to do this show, they said, I know David said, please bring teapots, and I did. But I wanted to kind of have a theme of what I'd started during COVID, which was the whole garden and garden structures and the chaos and of the surfaces of a garden, and because that's what brought me peace and happiness during that whole period of time. In fact, it isn't over. I was supposed to stay with my sister in Moses Lake tonight, and she called me and she says, oh, by the way, we were exposed to COVID, so you can't. And I go, great. There it goes, a longer drive home. But it's good. I got to go home and take care of a dog, so it's all good. So I don't know anymore. Are there any questions on all of this? There have to be.
You said you do, did you say 3 or 4 firings?
Mm-hmm.
Do you invite, or do you just do them by yourself?
Well, I have a team of 3 or 4 people that we use the kiln as a team. I have a little gallery I help run downtown Spokane that is clay only, and the back half of the gallery is a working studio for 2 of the fellas. And so those 3 of us, we fire a wood kiln together that belongs to one of them, and then we 3 fire my soda kiln together. Because that way, I could fire my soda kiln by myself, which I have, but I don't think I can get enough work made for, because when people build kilns, their eyes are always bigger than they really have the time to fill those kilns. My kiln was, in its early days, in its first life, was a production kiln of Rick Mahaffey and Rito Zaki's down in a basement somewhere in downtown Tacoma. It was a car kiln. And they lost their lease, and they had to tear it down. And on the Washington Potters Association newsletter, they were saying that they had this kiln that they wanted to sell, and I got a hold of them, and they shipped it in pieces and parts in a U-Haul trailer with a student all the way across the state for $750. All the brick, all the iron, everything to my house. The kid arrived in the middle of the night and ended up at the wrong house with a dangerous German Shepherd and spent the night on top of the U-Haul trailer. But I got it the next day. And so that kiln spent its first 10 years as my production kiln for doing the festivals around town in Cone 6 gas. And I don't think I ever filled it. I never had enough to fill it. It was big. It's 24-inch to 27-inch shelves, 12-inch, 3 deep, and then it's probably I can get in on my knees and stand up in it. Wow. So it's on my knees. So there's a lot of pots that go into it. And if I had it to do over again, I think Reed's is a lovely size of kiln. And it's probably about half. I think it's about half my size. So it takes us a while to fill it. And the good thing, though, is that that's a community of people. And I think that, you know, you unload a kiln and you load a kiln and you talk about each other's work. And, you know, I start feeling guilty that someone's work didn't turn out really well. And I said, you know, I'm really sorry it didn't. And they go, well, no, you need to fire this so it makes your work turn out really well. You know, because I'm looking at my work and going, I think I'm really happy. You know, so it is a community in Spokane that didn't exist 10 years ago of clay people. Because on my property, one of the guys that I work with at the little gallery, he loved wood firing, and he and his buddy, the other guy in the studio, had built this makeshift wood kiln up in the woods up near Priest Lake, Idaho, and it was just made of old electric kilns that they tore apart and had just laid them over. And so they were lucky if they reached, in my opinion, they were lucky if they reached Cone 1. But they loved the results they were getting, you know. And so I said to him, I says, well, you know, I've got that place down by the barn. Why don't you build yourself a wood kiln down there? And so on my property then we have his little Onagama, small one, and then my soda kiln. And the wood kiln, it took him probably, he had too many bells and buzzers on it. It took about 10 firings to finally start getting it to produce some really nice work. He needed to get rid of lots of air holes and, you know, a damper here and a damper there and a chimney with view holes, and, you know, just do a chimney, you know. And so the last 2 firings in that kiln have been really nice. That basket came out of his wood kiln, which was fun to have that happen. So I don't know.
More questions?
How big's your soda kiln, Gina?
My soda kiln, how big is it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, if I were to say it's 2 by 4 by 5. 2 by 4 feet deep by 5 feet tall. So is that like 35, 40 feet? I don't know what that is. Yeah. Yeah. So. Mm-hmm.
Do you have design ideas like before you make a given piece, or are you thinking about it as you're doing it? Like you're like, I'm gonna make
a teapot.
teapot.
I'm gonna make a vase. I'm gonna make a pitcher. I have this, I'll lay in bed, like the piece out in the front that's the 2 with the thing up the middle. You know, I wake up in the middle of the night and an idea's in my brain, and it's basically, it's coming off like that piece came first. And I thought, well, what if it was 2 of them and it went like this? But then what would I do with where they meet in the middle? Because I have, on my website, I have probably 2 or 3 what I call diptychs. And I actually saw these 2 tall pieces as diptychs because they're really wonderful next to each other with their spouts facing out or their handles facing out. So I saw them as a pair. So it was fun when you come into a space and people visualize your work. You know, he placed that piece different than I would have, and then I loved it that way. And to see them separate when I'd always seen them as together was fun. But then when do I draw, I will draw them as I'm working on. And to try and figure out, do I want that spout to come like this, or do I want it to come like this? Do I want it to have a belly and then another belly? How to, and then if it's wide like this, do I want the handle to be up, or do I want it to come off the side? And so I'll sit and I'll play with those kinds of ideas. Most of the time just in my tabletop with a pencil, and so the drawings are gone, but they're just problem solving. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You make such a convincing wood effect. I'm wondering why you don't just use wood for the impression.
Oh, well, because the wood doesn't have very much flexibility. So I'm rolling that slab in it, and I can't play with it. Whereas if I'm rolling it in this silly fabric stuff, then I can actually twist it, and I can poke. And I have this, I love this fabric. This is, always comes out looking like snakes. This is this fabric right there. And then I used to have tons and tons of different fabrics in my early years, and now I basically probably only have 3 or 4 that I use a lot. And then I love this one. This is the old double knit stuff. All of these, that old double knit stuff that you don't see very often. And so this one is probably, I'll bet this one is this one. Yeah, right here. But yeah, so I do have wood in my studio that I will use. Like I might use the wood to press the end of it into. But I don't use it for the sticks because I kind of like the fact that I'm kind of creating them. And then I don't use a lot of stamps. I make some stamps that like this is a little stamp that was just a shell, but I found out that it works really kind of fun poking it into the fabric, and it makes perfect holes for what you would see in a piece of stick. And I use a few commercial stamps, but not very many. I think this one is, I don't know. Oh, there it is. It's right here. That's it right there. But I'm breaking it up so you don't recognize it for what it is. When I first started doing texture way back 45 years ago or whatever, I taught a lot of workshops, and you'd see, lots of doilies and lace and stuff, and I just always never responded to that kind of use of. I like using textures that you can't tell what it is, and I like using a texture that that's geometrics or lines or dots, not something that's real representational like a doily or something like that. Yeah, it's my choices on those. Picked up that piece of flat, kind of makes a fun texture, but it goes in so deep that I have to be real careful because then it wants to tear and break. And I use a lot of these kinds of products. I'm always on the lookout for these from our vegetables because I can stretch them and play with them and distort them and then use them. Yeah. Okay. Fun. There we go. Oh, I can talk a little bit about my bottoms of my pieces. We talk about structure. Just then, that probably will be it. So when I work on this, when I build on this, and I started talking about it, and then I didn't. I build this part, and then I turn it upside down, and then I build the foot. And then once the foot's built, then I can turn it back over and start building the handles. And I have a heat lamp in my room, and so when I'm building the foot, then I put the heat lamp on it so that it can set up, and then it's strong enough for me to flip it over and work on the rest of the form. But sometimes the end result of the way I build is that the feet, if I start if I start here on this form and I start, so here's the form like this, and I'm building this foot like so. And then I start building the teapot, and the teapot starts going off bigger and bigger up here. Then all of a sudden this foot is undersized for the form of the teapot. And so then I have to like figure out a way to turn it upside down again and make the foot bigger so that it's in balance. But I've always liked the foot to sort of lift the pot off the table surface so that the pot isn't just sitting flat. The theory is that if you have even just anything where it can do a little shadow, then the pot sits light on the table instead of sitting heavy on the table. One of the things that I kept playing with on these is that I don't profess to be a tea-bowl maker. Like someone in this group is a tea-bowl maker. I'm not one of those. But I do have a sensibility about the forms that I kind of enjoy, in that if this is loose and loosey, then I thought the foot needed to be loose. And so even though it's been wheel thrown and trimmed, I tried to do the trim really loose because I just didn't feel like the first few times I did it and I had this perfectly trimmed foot on them, and then I had this nice loose pot with the kind of the loose little lip. I looked at that and I went, oh God, I hate that foot. And so then I did some little press mold feet, and they just didn't look good. So now I just kind of trim them really, really fast, and I try and even make it so that there's a little bit of up and down in them, so that they sort of relate to the rest of the piece. But you'll look around in a lot of my forms, the feet aren't flat on the ground. They have some movement to them, and I like the fact that it helps give them kind of some movement and some life, that kind of a foot, rather than just flat to the ground and heavy. Yeah. So. Okay. Oh, thank you. Oh, a question.
I came in a little late, but do you ever handle?
These, almost all of them are a combination of hand building and wheel throwing.
Okay.
All of them. So this is hand built, right here, and this is hand built with a slab. This was wheel thrown.
The bottom of the bowl.
This is wheel thrown, right here.
Yeah.
This is hand built with a slab,
Added on.
added on.
Okay.
And then this is a slab, this area right here, wrapped around this form.
Yeah.
And then these are wheel thrown and wheel thrown added to it. So even this picture over here, that piece is all slab built. That's all slab built, hand built. Yeah. And the basket was a bowl. And I cut off, this is an interesting thing. I cut off both sides of the bowl so I could make it flat, okay? Well, what's been really interesting about those basket forms is that they want to twist. And so I have to make sure that the thrown form is the exact same thickness as the slab I'm adding to it. That was my next solution to keeping them from twisting. And what I was ending up doing is as they're drying, they're twisting. And so then I'm sanding the foot. And then it comes out of the bisque load and I set it down and it's already like twisting again. And so I sand that. And then it came out of the wood firing and it's still twisting. So it's an interesting problem for me to solve because I like that basket form a lot. And out of about 7 or 8 that I've made, they want to wobble when they're done. Go back and forth. Yeah, so it's and yeah.
Why not let them twist?
I could let them twist, except that then once they're in your space and you're setting them down on the table and they're doing this instead of sitting, that's a problem. no one wants to put them into their home and adopt them because they don't want to sit right. They want to wobble. So when they twist, they're lifting the foot as well. Okay. So then I went in the drying process. Well, I'll put a little wad of clay right there where it's lifted up, and that'll solve it. And then it comes out. By the time it's come out of the bisque, then I'm not only have sanded off that wad of clay, but this area too. So it's been a journey. I'll solve it. I don't know how I'm going to solve it. I don't know how, but I will. I think it's just the thickness of the slabs, and I think my wheel thrown form, and you're combining a wheel thrown form around the slab forms. I think I've always worked really thin, and I think I have to work thicker on those. You know, so. Okay.
Well, thank you
I
so
mean-
much, Gina.
Thanks for the opportunity. Nobody knows I exist in Spokane anymore. I'm old news, so this is fun.
We hope you'll stop in to visit our latest exhibition featuring Judith Ames, Hank Holzer, Gina Freuen, and Lee Knowles-Metier. It's on view until July 30th.